Okay, so the title for my presentation today is ProjectWise from a rural district perspective. So as was mentioned in my introduction, I work in the San Angelo district, and I've worked there for several years now. The San Angelo district, along with the Childress district and the San Antonio districts, was a part of the original pilot program for ProjectWise, and we were a part of that process back in late 2009. So I've been working with ProjectWise for a few years now. So I'll start my presentation by just giving a brief overview of what ProjectWise is, or what it will allow us to do. And I'll follow that up by discussing an actual project that we used ProjectWise on that I hope will illustrate what ProjectWise brings to the table from a collaboration aspect or as a collaboration software. And then I'll finish my presentation by discussing briefly some of the features that ProjectWise has that I think will be beneficial to the highway department. And then I'll follow that up with just some closing thoughts. Okay, so what is ProjectWise? Well, I've got a definition here, courtesy of a short course presentation a few years back about what ProjectWise is, and I'm just going to read that out to y'all. ProjectWise is an electronic database management solution to support engineering document management. It offers the ability to work in a secure and collaborative environment across an enterprise. It supports project file storage on a central repository with rights set by the project engineer for team resource access, and it supports versioning of project data. Okay, so that whole paragraph is kind of a mouthful. So for the purposes of my presentation, I've got a different way of describing what ProjectWise is, but it's consistent with what I just read out to y'all. It's just stated a little bit differently. And you're gonna hear me say this several times throughout my presentation. But ProjectWise is about sharing files as opposed to sharing copies of files. It's as simple as that. So what ProjectWise is going to provide us with is a central location accessible across the state where all our files will be stored. So today, we're working on the T drive. So when someone from another area office or another district or from one of the divisions needs a copy of a file that you're working on, well, that's exactly what they get. They get a copy of that file. They don't necessarily have access to your T drive. So you send them a copy of the file. And then they're going to hope that you sent them the most current file, that there aren't ever any changes made to the original file, and if there are changes made to the original file, that somebody remembers to send them a revised copy. Well, ProjectWise is going to allow us to take a different approach in these instances. Again, today, when we're working on a project or when we start a project, we're working on the T drive. So you go to Windows Explorer, you create a new folder, you get your design team together, you let them know where that folder is at, and you tell them all the files for this project will be stored at this location. Well, ProjectWise works the same way pretty much, except that you're not going to be working on the T drive. You're going to be working on ProjectWise, that central storage location that's accessible across the state. So instead of going to the Windows Explorer to create your new folder, you're going to go to the ProjectWise Explorer. And you're going to do the same thing. You're going to create a new folder. You're going to get your design team together. You're going to let them know where that folder is at. And you're going to tell them all the files for this project will be stored at this location. Okay, so what? So we've got the project on ProjectWise now. So what? So what's the advantage of having the project on ProjectWise as opposed to the T drive? Well, as I mentioned earlier, once that project is on ProjectWise, it's accessible across the state. So anybody with ProjectWise on their PC will have access to that folder and to the files within that folder. Okay, so wait a minute. Everybody across the state is going to have access to my files, to my project. I'm not sure if I want that to happen. I want my design team to have access to my files. I want some of the stakeholders to be able to have access to my files. But I'm pretty sure I don't want everybody across the state to have access to my files. That doesn't need to happen. And it's not going to happen, because another essential feature that ProjectWise brings with it is security. And it's security in the form that you're going to control who has access to your files. And you're also going to control what type of access they have. So you're going to control who can see your files. You're going to control who can read your files. You're going to control who can write to your files, who can create files, who can create folders. You're going to have control over all of that. You own the files. You own that project. You're going to own the permissions to those files. And when I say you, I mean it's going to be at the local level. It's going to be the project manager. It's going to be the project engineer. It's not going to be somebody at IT. It's not going to be somebody at NTT Data. It's not going to be somebody at Bentley. It's going to be at the local level, and it's going to be the individual responsible for that project. So what does that mean for TxDOT? Well, it means that we can work not just across the district, but across district boundaries and with the different divisions, when necessary to meet our goals and to make the best use of our resources. And most importantly, at the same time, we're going to maintain the integrity of our files. So I want to talk next about a project where we did just that, and we used ProjectWise to do it with. So I'm going to just give a brief history of the project. The project we worked on was just a part of a much larger corridor expansion project, one that I believe has been a topic for short course presentations the past few years, so some of y'all may already be familiar with it. And I'm talking about the I-35 Central Texas Expansion Project in the Waco District. The Waco District undertook a very ambitious plan to expand an approximately 94-mile stretch of I-35 within its district boundaries from the south end of the district at the Bell-Williamson County line to just north of Hillsborough at the I-35 split. Plans called for widening this stretch to a minimum of 3 lanes in each direction with continuous one-way frontage roads. The total cost for this expansion, I think, is currently estimated at about $1.9 billion. So the map on the right shows the overall project, along with call-outs identifying the different projects that comprise the overall corridor. So in all, I think there are 18 projects showing up on that map. Of the 18 projects, 7 have been completed. 10 of those are currently under construction, and 1 is still in the planning stages. The 10 currently under construction amount to approximately 66 miles in length at a cost of just over $1 billion. So that's a lot of work, a lot of construction work going on in the Waco District on I-35 today. So I think it's safe to say that if there are 10 projects in the construction phase today, a few years ago, those same 10 projects were in the design phase. 66 miles of construction at a cost of over $1 billion. That's a lot of design work for any one district to be able to handle internally in a very limited time frame. So the Waco District, they did what they could internally, and they found some partners to help with the rest. Of course, they brought in some help from the consulting industry, but they also went out and brought in some help from other TxDOT districts. 2 of those districts that they asked for help on this was the San Angelo and the Childers districts. So the San Angelo and Childers districts were asked to pool our resources to work on one of these projects. The project we worked on is toward the north end of the corridor, and it's situated between West and Abbott. The preliminary estimate for this project was about $120 million. The project involved, it was new location, so you had a new horizontal alignment, you had new vertical alignment, you had 5 crossroads, so we had 5 bridges. Each one of those bridges was going to require a retaining wall. We also had several cross-drainage structures. We had storm sewer. We had a pretty complicated construction sequence, and we're going to end up with a pretty complicated traffic control plan as well. Now, I mentioned these details about the project just to bring to light that this project offered some very significant challenges from just a design standpoint. But what actually worried me the most about this project, it wasn't the challenges we were going to face from a design standpoint, but it was more so how was the collaboration between San Angelo and Childers going to work? Because we're in separate offices. We're separated by 225 miles, and we're supposed to work on the same project together. At the time, I don't think I even knew anybody from Childers. And so how are we going to manage our files, our electronic data? How are we going to keep track of the work? How are we going to come together and work on the design for this project? Because when we were first assigned this project, we didn't know about ProjectWise. So we were going to have to do this project on the T drive. And more precisely, we were going to have to do the project on 2 separate T drives. One of those was going to be in the Childers district, and the other one was going to be in San Angelo. So now, normally on a project of this type, you have several individuals working on separate pieces of the project. So you may have somebody in San Angelo working on the roadway geometry file, and you may have somebody in Childress working on the drainage file. You may have somebody else in San Angelo working on the traffic control plan, and you may have somebody else in Childress working on traffic items. Well then, by referencing files, we take these separate pieces that everybody's been working on and we bring them together to get a complete picture of what the overall project looks like. In other words, if somebody's working on the storm drain, they need to know where the curb and gutter is at. So they would reference the roadway geometry file to get that information. So it's imperative that they have a copy of the most current roadway geometry file. The storm drain may end up in the wrong place if they don't. So we all know what happens as you develop the design for a project. What you start off with Monday morning may not look like what you end up with Monday afternoon. Changes happen. So if I make a change to a file in San Angelo, I was going to have to send that file to Childress just to make sure that they had the most current information. If Childress were to make a change to a file that they were working on, they were going to have to turn around and send a copy of that file to San Angelo. So we had the most current information to work with. And that pretty much caused me to have nightmares because I knew what was going to happen. Invariably, somebody was going to make a change to a file and forget to send out a revised copy. And I'm pretty sure I would have been guilty of that myself. So I had some real concerns and some real issues with how we were going to manage the files for this project and how we were going to ensure that everybody had a copy of the most current information. Well, about a month into it, we found out that we were going to be part of a pilot program for a new software, and that new software was ProjectWise. Well, after that, my worries about managing the files and making sure that everybody was going to have a copy of the most current information pretty much went away, because we weren't going to be working on the T drive, we weren't going to be working on separate T drives, we were going to be working on ProjectWise. And what ProjectWise was going to allow us to do, we were going to be able to store all our files in a central location accessible to both districts. So everybody would have the most current information, and we would be sharing files and we wouldn't be sharing copies of files. So ProjectWise made this project possible because we were all going to be working with the same information. Everybody was going to be using the same cell library. And again, we were going to be sharing files. We weren't going to be sharing copies of files so that everyone would have the most up-to-date information. And everybody would hopefully be on the same page. Anyway, to make a long story short, we were able to make our landing date for this project. The project actually let in February of 2011 at a bit of just over $100 million. And just kind of some information on where we're at with the project today. Construction began. Well, it's actually under construction today. Construction began in October of 2011, so we've been at it for 3 years now, and we anticipate we'll finish sometime spring of next year. We're still collaborating with the Waco District in the construction phase of the project. Construction is actually being handled by the Hillsborough area office, but we still help out with change orders and clarifications when called upon. So that's just one example of a project, and a rather complicated project, and a pretty large project that we were able to use ProjectWise with and to bring resources from 2 separate districts together to work on, and we were able to make it happen. And I don't think that we would have been able to make it happen without ProjectWise. Just the file management issues, I think, would have been very difficult to have dealt with. So before I close that, I've just got just want to touch on a few other features about ProjectWise that I found kind of useful. Batch processes. Batch processes work on ProjectWise, so you'll still be able to run macros or scripts through batch processes in the ProjectWise environment. Audit trail. ProjectWise has an audit trail. So from the day a file is created, ProjectWise will maintain a history of who accessed that file and whether or not any changes were made to that file. Storage. I think we've already touched on this. There's plenty of storage, and that can help take some pressure off an overtaxed T drive. Security, I've already mentioned this, I just want to mention it again. Access to files will be controlled at the local level, so you're going to decide who has access to your files and what type of access they have. It's got an advanced search engine that allows for customized searches. And there's a short learning curve. When you first open up the ProjectWise Explorer, the first thing you're going to notice is it looks a lot like the Windows Explorer, and it actually works very much like the Windows Explorer. So just in closing, the example project I used in my presentation involved 2 districts combining their resources to complete a project. But ProjectWise works the same within district boundaries as it does across district boundaries. And I think Diana touched on that with her presentation. And it doesn't matter the scale of the project. My example was a pretty large project that we used it on, but it's going to work the same way on an ACP project, an overlay project, a Super 2 project, or just a bridge replacement. It'll work on any kind of project. So now there are still some issues with ProjectWise that need to get worked out. And again, we've already discussed that, so I'm not going to get too much into it. The biggest issue we had on the 5B project, or my example project, was, and it was more apparent in the Childers district than in the Stangelo district, and it involved speed. It does take a little bit longer to open files. It does take a little bit longer to print files, and it does take a little bit longer to create sheets. ProjectWise is just a little bit slower than working on the T drive. And finally, I think the biggest thing about ProjectWise, and I've mentioned this several times already, is that by having a central location, a central storage location for all our files, we're going to be sharing files instead of sharing copies of files. And by having a central storage location, ProjectWise is going to allow us to pool our resources within districts or across district boundaries when we need to make our letting dates and to get our jobs done. And at the same time, we're going to maintain the integrity of our files. And when you're able to pool your resources to work on a common project, whether it's across the district or across district boundaries, you start to share ideas and best practices with each other. And I think at the end of the day, that's going to be a benefit to TxDOT.